Hey, what is up everyone? Welcome to another episode of Coding Cardio. Today we are going to talk a little bit about the display property, specifically around a few different items that I think can often be confusing for people, and that is block, inline block, and inline level items. So we're going to talk a bit about how we use them. I'm going to show you some examples. So let's actually dive right into this. So we have some code here that I wrote, and before I actually show you the differences here, I kind of want to talk at a high level about the differences between those three. I think it's easier to see them all together at once rather than tackling one at a time. So when you have a block level item, and by default, most of your text tags are going to be block level, so your H1 through 6s, your P tags. Block level items are basically going to force themselves onto a new line, and so it's not going to let things wrap around it, and it's going to take as much width as it can. So a lot of times you'll see here it's going to go full width of the parent. So we'll see that here. And so the next one, inline block, is going to first only take up as much width as necessary. So a lot of times that'll be like the width of the content. So something in this example here, this cool, in an inline block example, would only take this much space to start with. But inline block also respects a lot of your spacing properties. So your margin, your paddings, your height, and your widths are all going to be respected by the document as normal. And then inline is very similar. It's only going to start off by taking as much width as it needs to at first. And it's also going to ignore some of those spacing properties and the margin and padding. It's only going to respect some of that, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So let's actually dive into this real quick. So again, our H3 by default is a block level item. Our span by default, the browser makes this an inline level item. So our span here is an inline, and I gave it the background red so we can see that a little bit easier. So let's actually jump in, and if we were to do something like inline, we would see nothing changes because again, that's an inline. It's only going to take up as much space as it needs to. But if we were to do block, we would see that then pushes itself onto a new line and takes up as much space as it can. Again, this is going to be go the full width of as much as it can here. So it's going to go to the edge here and not let anything wrap around it. We can still apply some widths to it if we wanted to, make that a lot smaller. We could still do some height if we wanted to, make this a lot bigger, and the browser is going to respect this all the same. If we were to do inline block here, we would see that nothing changes from an inline. So let's see an inline, nothing changes. An inline block, nothing changes. But if we wanted to establish maybe like a height on here of 150 pixels and a width, if we wanted to put that on here of maybe 150 pixels, we would see that the document respects that the same. We could also do margin 5 pixels and padding 5 pixels, and we would see that that still gets treated just the same as it normally would. So if we take off the block part of this and just make this an inline item, we should get some really crazy results. Well, it's actually not as crazy. It looks similar to how it did when we started off with. We can see that no matter what we do here, our height is never going to get respected, and our width is never going to get respected. The browser is just going to ignore those properties on an inline item. So we can take those off of there. And the lesson to remember with this is with your margin and paddings. So let's start off with margin. Margin is on an inline item is only ever going to respect the left and right sides of that. So we could see if we make that like 1,000 or something, oops, that's way too big. If we make this like 100 or something, we can see that the items get pushed to the left and right of it, but we're not seeing any margin on the top and bottom here, and that's just getting ignored. So the last thing, and I think this part is a little bit strange with padding, is that it's sort of similar with margin. So if we were to put padding of 20 pixels on each side, our left and right would behave normally, but we would see some extra space get added to the top and bottom here. But the other, basically the parent that's housing this span isn't going to treat that as normal padding. So you can see here our span is only this light blue right here. Our H3 is only this light blue right here. That's the parent of the span, but it's not respecting that padding on the top and bottom. So how we contrast that, if you want to see an example, inline block, we can see that our parent then adjusts for that extra spacing there and becomes the full width as it needs to. And I'll take that off one more time so you can see. sort of the strangeness that's going on there. So if you're going to use inline items, it's perfectly reasonable. Like if something like this, if you wanted to single out like something specific in like a sentence, as long as you're not playing with any of the spacing, like the width or the height or margins or padding, as long as you know how that's going to affect it, it can be useful. But yeah, as we can see, inline block is going to behave just the same, just respecting those spacing things. So when would inline block be useful? Let's look at an example of that. Let's say we had, let's say we're making a portfolio site, right? And up here we had our unordered list, and we had maybe like a home, we had a about, and we had a contact. And let's say that this is going to represent our nav bar. You're probably familiar with this style. So inline block is something that's used pretty frequently. This style type, let's just get rid of the bullets there. And now we need to basically have these all on one line because we don't want our nav bar to look like that. So we can say something like display inline block here. I'm sorry, we actually want this display inline block on the list item itself because that's really what we want to control the spacing of. So we can say inline block on that, and that will cause things to wrap so they're next to each other. And we can also, let's actually make the background color here aquamarine, great color. And we'll add some padding here, 10 pixels. And we can also, now that it's inline block, remember we can control the width now. So we can, this is useful because we can control basically how much space that's going to take up, and we can make these side by side. And then we can say text align equals center. We can put that text there. So now we have sort of a nice looking nav bar here that has 3 items, and you can see why inline block would be useful for something like this, because a lot of times you want to control the spacing that it's going to take up here. And then lastly, for block level items, if we wanted to have maybe below this, if we wanted to have some descriptions here, or just something, you know, we want to put on our portfolio site for a few different sections. And by default, our divs are going to be block items, but if we ever wanted to put that on there just to make sure that they don't sort of get overridden by anything else, we could certainly just make sure that they're block level items there, and we can control. Remember, block level items respect any of the margin properties that you're going to put on it, any of the padding properties that you're going to put on it, any width properties, or anything like that. And yeah, that's just sort of a high level of how to use those 3 things. Again, block level is going to force itself onto a new line, make sure things don't wrap to the left or right of it. It's going to respect any width, any height, margin, or padding. Inline items are only going to take up as much space as necessary, so basically the width of the content. It won't respect any width or any height. It will only respect the left and rights of the margin and padding. And then inline block is similar to inline. It will respect, except it will respect any width or height properties as well as any margin or padding. Yeah, hope this has been useful for you. I just wanted to give you a brief introduction so you can start using this yourself and playing around with it. I will leave some links for some content, or some links in the description for some more information from various resources that I think are helpful. Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing. It helps me out a lot. But yeah, that is all. I hope you learned something here today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.